Welcome, my name is Marco from Water Dragon Arts. This is a new video about sinking the Qi and sitting into the Qua. I want to tell you what it actually means to sit into the Qua and how you can execute this instruction in the proper kind of way. I also want to tell you what it means to sink your Qi and explain how those two instructions that you probably often hear in your Taijiquan practice or your Qigong practice, how they relate to each other. So I just dropped the term Qi as if it was self-explanatory. I understand that this is still a tricky idea and a tricky subject for some of you. Of course, we could go by the textbook definition right now and say there is heaven Qi, earth Qi, human Qi, and Qi is everywhere in the universe. And even though this would be correct, it's not necessarily gonna help us a lot with understanding it in this context. So the definition, or better the way this term is used, changes slightly depending on the context. In other words, a Feng Shui practitioner or a TCM practitioner looks at it in a different kind of way than a Xingyiquan, like an internal martial artist, Xingyiquan practitioner, or Qigong and Taijiquan practitioner. So it's always important to look at the term Qi in context and see what kind of art we're talking about. Is it Qigong, is it Taijiquan, is it TCM? So if we practice Taijiquan, for example, or also Qigong for body development, then we're not considering Qi as that energy that we guide through the meridians in our body, for example. Okay, so Qi in Taijiquan doesn't really have anything to do with the meridian system. We're not actually taking the Qi and trying to force it down, or we don't try to guide it through the meridians when we practice. So in this case, we're referring to Qi as basically a term that helps us understand how we can release the tissues and relax those tissues down. But I'm going to talk about that more in detail in just a second. First, I wanted to tell you about the Qua, because actually we need to learn about the Qua before we learn about sinking the Qi. If we don't know how to sit into the Qua correctly, if we don't utilize the area of the hips in the right way, we won't be able to sink the Qi. It will be as if we would be creating a blockage in the middle of our body. So in other words, if we don't sit into the Qua correctly and the area of the hips will remain too stiff, Qi is not able to flow towards or to settle and sink towards our feet. Basically, what we have to do is relax the pelvis down and keep the entire hips area as relaxed as possible, so that we basically dissolve that separation of the upper body and the lower body. If the hips are tight, they're basically cutting the body in half, and the pelvis will be like plugged on top of the legs. But instead, what we want to do is we want to relax the pelvis down naturally, so that all the tissues in the upper body and the lower body connect again, and we're able to relax all the tissues down from the upper body down towards the lower body. So this connection is really important, and we can only keep this connection open if we relax the pelvis, therefore if we sit into the Qua. Now, you might have heard your Qigong or Tai Chi teacher say something like moving from the hips if you execute a form, for example. And even though this is not a wrong instruction, it's somewhat confusing, because what does the hips even mean? The hips is basically this entire area going once around the whole body. Maybe I see this wrong, but that's what I would think of the area of the hips right away. So obviously we don't want to focus on the entire area of the hips, because if you do this, for example, turning the body to the left, you will realize that the body behaves in a strange way. Your legs will be fairly tight, so the muscles will be engaged. Most likely your knee is going to be twisted, and you can see my knee has already fallen in towards my center line, and that's never good. You're gonna create lots of pressure there and stress the tendons in an inconvenient way. This might hurt your knees. So there are lots of other reasons why this is not good. The main one in this case is even though I'm turning from the hips, I'm in the position now that I cannot actually release and relax my pelvis down. And relaxing the pelvis down is the number one most important aspect of sitting into the Qigong correctly. So as I'm turning to the left now, just focusing roughly on the outside area of my hips, I'm twisting and engaging many muscles and I cannot be relaxed. My pelvis, again, is like sitting on top of my legs instead of sinking into my lower half of the body. That's why it's not really good to just say move from the hips. That's why we have to learn how to move from the Qigong by closing and opening the Qigong. And the Qigong is this area here. When we move from the Qigong, we are able to maintain a very relaxed state. We can be sung all the time, if this is a term to you. So be relaxed, but maintain a certain bone structure. Maintain the joints open, the crown of the head suspended, and so on. Okay, so it's really important to move from the Qigong. Now, before we learn how to move from it, first we will need to learn how to simply sit into the Qigong. Okay, so you see we're going to work our weights all way backwards. We're kind of reverse engineering the sitting into the Qigong. So I want to explain to you how you can sit into the Qigong correctly, how you can execute this instruction properly. You've probably noticed that in a lot of different Qigong exercises, you're having an up and down movement. That means you're actually sinking down, you're lowering the body, sitting into the Qigong, but then mostly, quite often on the inhale, rise back up again. And this up and down movement has a very specific purpose. This purpose will change a little bit depending on the kind of practice that you're doing at that moment. Mainly, this movement is important to actually lower the center of gravity or the center of mass of your body. Okay, so if you're sinking down and sitting into the Qigong, you're bringing the center of gravity down towards the lower Dan Tian. You could theoretically bring it lower, but most of the time we want it in the lower Dan Tian. If you're practicing exercises like Dan Tian Gong, for example, then it's very important because by bringing the center of mass into the Dan Tian, in combination with the breath, the mind, and the movements of the hand, you're actually manipulating Qi and forming the Dan Tian, developing the Dan Tian field. Okay? If you're rising up, that upward movement means that your center of gravity will move up towards the chest again. And here again, this can have a different purpose depending on the practice that you're doing. So there is another aspect that's very important to mention, and that is the spine. You might have practiced lots of Zhan Gong exercises already, standing pole exercises. And that's very good. I'm a big fan of them. And when you're standing in those exercises, you're usually relaxing the pelvis down as well, while you maintain a specific bone structure, which means your crown is gently suspended from above, your pelvis is relaxed down, and you have a little bit of space between each vertebra. So you're basically stretching the spine a little bit in this posture. It's very similar to what we're doing here when we include the movement. However, whenever we add movement, it's a lot harder to maintain those principles. Obviously, because we don't have the time anymore to focus in such a precise way. There's always movement up and down, so we have to make sure that we focus on the right things, okay? It's even harder if we apply those principles to our Taijiquan practice, because legitimately every movement in the Taiji form, for example, should have those principles applied. Keeping the Qigong open and relaxed, making sure the pelvis is relaxing down, release down, crown of the head up, all these things. But anyways, we'll talk about that at a later stage. I want you to look at these two balls here. The red ball is representing the pelvis. The green ball is representing the crown of my head. And the crown of the head is basically just up here in the end of the cervical spine, the cervical vertebrae. Basically, if you go up here, just from one ear to another, and then wherever you meet up in the middle on top of your head, that's the crown of the head. So it's not right in the center here, but it's a little bit further back. Okay, and the white string in the middle is representing my spine. So first of all, the way I'm standing right now, I'm actually collapsed a little bit in my lumbar spine here. Okay, because I have my knees pushed out completely, they're like locked out, and my pelvis is just kind of like a big ball on top of my legs. So my spine, let's just say to represent it like this, is kind of in this shape right here. There's no stretch, there's no engagement in the spine, there is no opening. Worst case, the vertebrae are actually touching each other, like bone on bone. Obviously, we want to avoid that all the time. Now, the first thing that if we begin to sit into the Qigong is we focus on the pelvis area. If we focus on the pelvis and try to release it down, relax it down, we will begin to sink, and at some point we will sink so much that the spine, the white string here, is slightly engaged, slightly stretched. Now, in order for us to sink correctly, we need to bend the knees, but we never want to bend the knees further than our toe line. So that means we don't want to bend that the knees go past our toes. Okay? When you focus on relaxing the pelvis, in the beginning you might have to tuck your pelvis a little bit. Okay? Later on you want to move away from that instruction again because you don't really want to use your muscles to remain in this position. Instead, you want to be able to just release and relax the area and allow the pelvis to move into that position on its own. But lots of people have lots of tension in the quad, the hips and the lower back. In the beginning, it might help you to actually turn the pelvis under a little bit just to get an idea of the feeling and the position that you want to be in. However, don't over-tuck, okay? So don't try to bring your pelvis in that position, flattening out the lumbar curve, and then really use your muscles to pull the pelvis in that place, okay? Just move into it slightly, ease out a little bit again, and step by step work towards just relaxing the pelvis down. So we're bending the knees slightly, relaxing the pelvis down. Okay, let's come to the head. At the same time as I'm releasing the pelvis down, or at least begin to do that, I'm also having the crown in a slightly elevated position, as if the crown is suspended by a string, just gently. Also not just like trying to pull up the spine like crazy and keeping it here, just kind of tucking the chin in a little bit and gently raising the crown up. You feel a slight stretch in the back of the neck, and that's okay. So what we do right now is actually creating two opposing forces, right? The pelvis that's relaxed down and the crown of the head, which is suspended from above. Ta-da! Okay? This will result in a stretch in the spine and create some space. Okay? So you're not collapsed in the spine anywhere, and you're able to relax. Okay? So once you have done this, right now I'm already standing in like a relaxed position, but in order to demonstrate this a little bit better to you, I want to just exaggerate a little bit, okay? So once you've begun to sink, I want you to think of your head like being pinned into place. You're not actually moving your head. Instead, you're just focusing on the quad and relaxing this a little bit lower. Okay, so from this collapsed spine, you release the pelvis, and then you keep sinking the pelvis, and then you will reach a point in which your spine is sufficiently stretched, and then your head will automatically come down as well as you sink lower. And this is how we're going to sink into the quad, by focusing on the pelvis, keeping the crown of the head up, okay, and then sink down. Just move the head once you have reached a sufficient stretch. Obviously, this is just going to be a few millimeters, okay? It's not that you will see this in the video, but you want to make sure that this movement is guided by the releasing and relaxing of the pelvis first, and that the crown will just follow once you have stretched the spine sufficiently. all right? At the same time, as you're sinking and sitting into the Qigong, you want to make sure that your weight is not too far on the heels, and this happens quite often in the very beginning. You want to make sure that your weight is still evenly distributed or on the Yang trend point. So if you sink and your weight is too much on the heels, then you will feel lots of pressure there. You're likely to collapse in the lumbar spine again and you will be leaning back. But if you're going to focus on the Yang trend point and sink down here, you're able to release the pelvis and keep the weight evenly distributed. Now it's okay if the the upper body leans forward a little bit, okay? That's way better than leaning back, because here you're going to collapse the spine again. But if you're leaning forward a little bit, that's okay. And you just want to make sure that you keep focusing on the pelvis, relax it more, relax the butt cheeks, try to relax the thighs, all the places that carry lots of tension, so that your pelvis is able to just release a little bit lower and lower and lower, while the crown of the head keeps up there, remains suspended from above. So, in other words, if you start to sit into the Qigong, you're just standing like normal, you keep the head where it is, and you release from the pelvis. Relax down here, okay? So the crown just pulls up because the pelvis is going down. On the other hand, we're coming to the moving up part now. We don't focus on the pelvis anymore, though we will make sure that it remains relaxed, but instead we will focus on the crown of the head, this part here, the ball. Now we are up here in the lower position of our Qigong. The hips are very relaxed, by the way. I'm able to sink my Qi here, which I'm going to explain very soon. Now I concentrate on the crown of the head and move the crown up until, again, the spine is stretched sufficiently and my pelvis is following. So in very short, when you sink down, first you focus on the pelvis, your crown follows, right? Then you focus on the crown and your pelvis follows. So when you sink, your pelvis is guiding the movement. When you're rising up, the crown of the head is guiding the movement. And this will result in a constant and unbroken stretch of the spine. Okay, so at no time as you're moving up and sinking down are you collapsing in the spine. So now you already know what to pay attention to when you sit into the Qigong and rise back up. So when you do that down and up movement in your Qigong practice, you know that you have to focus on the pelvis and the crown of the head and move in this specific way. This will greatly improve your practice, you will see. Now, the next thing that you will do is focusing more on relaxation, because I'm assuming that once you have learned how to move in such a way, you will still have tension in different areas in the body, for example, the hips. It's about dissolving all this tension so you're able to release the pelvis down a little bit better. And then we're already coming to the next step, which is sinking your Qi. Eventually you will probably feel how you accumulate a little bit of tension, like a little bit of a strange engagement in your waist as well. And that's a very good sign, as long as you have been relaxing all the muscles down. Because obviously, naturally, due to the two opposing forces, the crown of the head is going up and the pelvis is going down, you're creating a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of engagement in basically the entire region in between these two spots. Okay? Now, we're already moving a little bit towards being Song and one of the principles of Yijin Jing Qigong. But let me first give you one more tip to sit into the Qigong and relax a little bit better. So one common mistake that I see people do is that they try to lower their body to the ground in order to shift the center of gravity. And of course that's not the way to do it, because you will not be able to relax and apply those principles. If you think of sitting into the Qigong and lowering your center of gravity down as a squat or something, obviously you're going to engage a lot of the muscles in the legs and the hips okay, and you're creating lots of tension. The trick is basically imagining you're sitting down on the ledge of a small table or like a stool or something like this. If you just think back, and maybe you're near a chair right now, you can try it out. If you're actually sitting down, in that moment of sitting down, you're not so concerned about using the muscles in your legs anymore. You're not dropping and falling down, but instead you just naturally sit down. You don't have to worry because you know that you're going to be supported very soon. Now, this trick is actually very helpful because if you're just thinking of sitting back, you will be able to immediately come into that position that's very much close to sitting into the Qigong correctly. Because here, you're just sitting down, not concerning yourself too much. Sometimes overthinking is not good either. And just lower the pelvis down. So maybe find a chair and just try it out and see how the engagement in your legs will change if you have a ledge that you are going to be supported on, as to if you're just sitting into the quad down without that ledge. You will probably notice that the engagement is way stronger if you don't have a chair. So maybe you can use that to your advantage. It just practices focusing on the pelvis and just imagining you're sitting on the ledge of a stool or something like this. And this will already bring you really close into the right position, and you can keep working from there. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is syncing your qi. Now, in this case, and I already mentioned that before, we're referring to, well, we're not just referring to the tissues in our body, but here the qi is directly related to the tissues. Because we don't say, take your qi or imagine your qi. We don't say imagine an energy ball that you press through your meridians down into your feet. Instead, what we're referring to when we say sync your qi is mainly relaxing. Okay, imagine this, not relaxing, you're trapping your qi in your shoulders, but then do this. Release and relax, let go. Okay, that's the act of letting your qi sink, releasing and relaxing the muscles as good as possible, basically allowing them to hang down from your bones like a wet cloth on a clothes hanger. In fact, this is a very important part in Yang Taijiquan and lots of Qigong practices. Okay, you want to make sure that you develop these qualities in the body, making sure that you're able to release the muscles down as good as possible, so that you will be able to stretch some of the connective tissues and fascia that is basically in between. Again, we're already talking a little bit about the principles of the Yijin Jing here, which is not really the goal to talk about in this specific lesson. But just remember, when you are hearing the cue of syncing your qi, then it's also related to relaxing the tissues, allowing the muscles to hang down from the bones and sinking as low as possible, slowly further down towards the feet. So all you really have to do is going through the body and making sure that you release all the tension. Sounds very easy in the beginning, but obviously it takes a little bit of training, because you really want to do this on a very deep level. If you just do it like I did here, that's just superficial level, okay? That's just the gross, rough tension that's in the body. But you want to move through deeper layers of the tissues and really be able to relax and release on a deep kind of level to create that maximum effect. This releasing and relaxing of the tissues is later really important to mobilize your Jin, which is interesting for your Tai Chi practice. But it's also an important part of Yijin Jing Qigong because it relates to the inner transformation of the tissues. But again, this will be part of another video. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you have learned a lot, that you now know how to sit into the Qigong correctly, and that hopefully you don't confuse sinking your qi with energy balls and pressing qi through your meridians into the feet or something like that. Thanks for watching, and see you very soon.